So our speaker for today is Dr. Mary Beth Miller. Dr. Miller is a licensed clinical psychologist and assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry here at University of Missouri. She obtained a PhD in clinical psychology from Oklahoma State University in 2015 and her clinical psychology training consortium from Brown University also in 2015. Dr. Miller trained as a postdoctoral fellow at the Brown University Center for Alcohol Addiction Studies, and she's maintained a position as an adjunct to date. She is the University of Missouri School of Medicine Dorset L. Spurgeon, MD, Distinguished Medical Research Awardee for 2022. That is pretty prestigious. Dr. Miller has a demonstrated track record of early career excellence, evidenced through notable early career award achievement. Example, she won the Early Career Alumni Award from Westminster College in 2022, and also won the 2021 Distinguished Scientific Early Career Contributions Award. Dr. Miller has over 100 peer-reviewed publications and is well-funded both at the national and local level. She serves on numerous committees, including NIH's Enhancing Diversity in Alcohol Research Committee, and is also on the University of Missouri School of Medicine Advisory Committee for Missouri Forward, just to mention a few. Dr. Miller's research aims to reduce substance-related harm among high-risk groups, example, young adults, military veterans, those with co-occurring mental or physical health conditions, via effective and efficient prevention, intervention, and treatment. Her most recent research targets sleep as a way to reduce alcohol-related harm. And today she'll be talking about some of the exciting research she has been doing in this area. Help me welcome Dr. Miller. Yeah, over to you, Dr. Miller.
Sorry, it took me a minute to find my unmute button back. I was trying to position my screen so I could see your all's faces and see my presentation. So sorry about that. Thank you all for having me. I feel honored to be presenting. There's lots of cool stuff going on in your department as well. So excited to hear from anyone who's interested in collaborating when I'm finished walking through some of the stuff that I've been doing. As she said, I'm actually an associate professor as of tomorrow.
Congratulations.
So, I know I was like practicing and I was like, oh, I get to say I'm an associate now. But thank you all for having me. I wasn't sure exactly what would be of most interest to your department. So anyone who wants to come up, feel free to stop me throughout the presentation if you want, it doesn't matter. And then at the end, if you all have questions or if I didn't touch on something that you're really interested in, please feel free just to ask. I wasn't sure how to tailor for today.
And you can also type in your questions in the chat box so that we can read those out after the presentation.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, first, before we get started talking about sleep, it's really important to clarify what I mean by sleep, because sleep is a multidimensional construct. It can be measured a million different ways using a variety of assessments. And so when I'm talking to you all about sleep today, I use the term pretty broadly. Dan Bicey has a paper talking about sleep health, where he uses the acronym SATED to help you remember what sleep means. So one dimension of it being sleep satisfaction. So good sleep quality, feeling like you're satisfied with your sleep. A is for alertness, feeling awake during the day, sleeping at night. T is for your timing, you're in line with your circadian rhythm. So for most people, sleeping at night and being awake during the day. E is for efficient sleep, which just means you fall asleep relatively quickly and you spend most of your time in bed actually sleeping. And then D is for duration. So for most adults, 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night, but the amount that you need is going to be unique to you. So if you're a 7-hour sleeper, you really should be shooting for 7 hours. And then if you're a 9-hour sleeper, you really need 9, not 8, things like that. So that's what I mean by sleep. What I'll be talking a lot today about insomnia, and insomnia, basically all of these dimensions of sleep are implicated in insomnia, but the problem can differ across people. So some people with insomnia have take a lot of time to fall asleep, but also a lot of them also their circadian rhythms are off as well. And so all of these constituent parts of sleep come to play. Also important to acknowledge before I talk about sleep effects on alcohol, that alcohol does have an effect on sleep as well. And if anything, this is the more robust direction of association that's been studied in the literature. So I put up here just a brief overview. Can you all see my mouse? Okay, cool. So when you're looking here on your x-axis, we have hours of sleep. And then on your y-axis is relative wakefulness. So the top of the graph is you're awake. And then your lowest stage, it's actually only 1 through 3 now. I need to update my graph, but is your deepest sleep down here on the bottom. And so what most people will tell you that alcohol does to sleep is acute doses of alcohol right before bedtime are going to make you fall asleep more quickly. But also you will see increases in REM sleep, particularly in the first half of the night, increases in wakefulness, particularly in the second half of the night. A couple points that are important here though. This sleep onset effect where it helps you fall asleep, that depends on a lot of things. Some being the dose of alcohol, what limb of the BAC curve you're on when you're trying to fall asleep, and potentially your circadian phase. Also tolerance to the sedative effects of alcohol develops within 3 to 6 days. There's also some indication that these alcohol effects on sleep might differ depending on the level of slow wave sleep you have at baseline. So people with alcohol use disorder, for example, tend to have lower levels of slow wave sleep at baseline. People with insomnia tend to have lower levels of slow wave sleep at baseline. So there's a lot of it depends in here, but this is what we generally see in experimental studies with healthy adults. And this is important for those of you, I don't know how relevant addiction is for most of you. George Koob, who's the director of NEP, talks a lot about the addiction cycle. And so they conceptualize addiction as going through 3 cycles: the binge intoxication phase, where incentive salience is most prominent. So these are like craving kinds of things. Withdrawal and negative, then you move on to the withdrawal negative affect phase that's characterized by a lot of negative emotionality. So we aren't sure about how to measure this. There's lots of different ways, but anxiety, depression, in my studies, we look at difficulties in regulating your emotions, and then moving on to the preoccupation, anticipation kind of phase, where you also see impairments in executive function. And the important thing here is in their model, they talk about sleep impacting specifically these 2 arms, legs, whatever you're thinking about of the cycle, where insomnia treatment could be especially effective at these 2 phases. This hasn't been tested as much, which is where my research comes in, but there are multiple RFAs if anyone's interested in this area and addiction and broadly. The directors of NIAAA and NIDA are both really interested in sleep for this reason, because it's part of their model. So when I was on my postdoc, most of what I was doing at Brown was trying to get my hands on as many data sets as I could to see how robust the association is when you're looking at sleep as the predictor and not the outcome. And so I will walk you through kind of what all the different studies we found across the spectrum of alcohol use disorder, starting with people who've never used alcohol. And this is really important because when you're looking, because we know that alcohol affects sleep, it's hard to say for certain that sleep affects alcohol use when all of these people we're looking at had already used alcohol, if that makes sense. And so part of get a little bit at the directionality of associations, you want to look at this among people who are substance naive at baseline. So there are several studies now, mine being just one, where they've recruited children or adolescents who had not used alcohol yet, and then looked at sleep at that phase, predicting substance use prospectively. And so when you do it that way, sleep among people who have never used substances before does predict the onset of alcohol use, binge severity, the onset of binge drinking, and alcohol-related problems really consistently across all these studies. It also has been consistently linked to cannabis use in all of these studies, where you don't see as consistent of effects as for nicotine. It does in some and it doesn't in others. So
Can I ask to restate that so I get it? So in adolescence, poor sleep predicts use of substances later, and how later? Is it
good question.
Or
yeah, so several of these are actually looking at it in children. So parent report of sleep disturbance, in like 6 to 8 year olds was one of the first one was this Wong study. I think it was like 6 to 8 or something. Parent reported sleep problems, predicted the onset of substance use at 15, 16, 20. I don't know, but lots of years later. Ours, I think our students were closer in the 10 to 12 range, predicting substance use at like between 16 and 18.
And why would they be collecting sleep data in the first place in any of these studies? I mean, you're leveraging data sets that already have sleep in them. Is that right?
Yes. So the Wong studies, this was her hypothesis the whole time. So she was specifically looking at this hypothesis. My study was leveraging data. They had included sleep data as for anyone who hadn't onset to substance use yet, they wanted the assessments to be the same length. And so they asked about sleep.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Okay. So then when you transition, moving to those who have started drinking, but they drink socially, don't necessarily meet for an alcohol use disorder, we also see that sleep problems exacerbate risk for alcohol-related problems. And so these are the predictors, these are all predictors that have been strongly linked to alcohol-related problems. And so these were just all moderation models. Drinking quantity is linked to more alcohol-related problems among people who also have sleep disturbance. Psychiatric symptoms are linked to more alcohol-related problems when you also have sleep problems. Impulsive personality traits are also linked to more problems when you also have sleep problems. And again, this is findings from my postdoctoral studies, but then also from others. And this was one of the first studies we did just to show the robustness of this association or this moderating effect over time. So this is baseline up to 5 months later. How often do you think you get enough sleep is the variable we used here. Again, because I'm using secondary data analysis. So this would get, when you're thinking about the SATED acronym, this would be getting at either adequate sleep satisfaction or quality, I guess, depending on how you respond. But we found that this moderates the effect where alcohol use is more strongly linked to alcohol-related problems that across all of these time points, not just at baseline. And then again, also looking at the sleep contributing to mental health problems. In this model, you can reverse these sometimes, and the reviewers asked us to do that. Sleep problems at base, this was the better fitting model though, where sleep predicted other mental health symptoms, which then accounted for alcohol-related problems at 12 months was the better fitting model here. These were with veterans. So just demonstrating it seems to be a pretty robust predictor of alcohol-related problems over time. And then when you look among people who actually have alcohol use disorder, many individuals with alcohol use disorder do indicate the presence of insomnia prior to the onset of alcohol use disorder. However, that's a retrospective assessment that you're using for that. But among those who have alcohol use disorder, insomnia symptoms, when looked at prospectively, have also been linked both to relapse, psychosocial problems associated with drinking. So things like not being able to keep my job, getting into fights with people, things like that, decreased quality of life, and suicidal ideation. So again, a strong predictor of basically overall functioning. So these were kind of the conclusions for my postdoc, is that we had robust associations between sleep and especially alcohol-related problems across the spectrum of alcohol use disorder, including pre-alcohol use disorder. I just want to clarify too, this came up a lot in my job talks actually. I am not saying that sleep is the only predictor of drinking or even the most important. What was appealing to me, because I'm an prevention intervention person, is how I was trained. I'm a clinical psychologist. It is one of the few predictors of alcohol-related problems for which we have really strong behavioral treatments. And so cognitive behavioral therapies for insomnia tend to work for 70 to 80% of patients, are resolved by the end of treatment. The treatment effects last up to 2 years. There are very few side effects. It tends to be less stigmatized than other mental health treatments. And so these were part of the reasons that I was really excited about insomnia and sleep relative to other potential predictors of drinking and alcohol-related problems. So then my plan, as I was applying for jobs, was to see, if insomnia symptoms increase risk for alcohol-related problems, then treatment of insomnia should decrease risk. And that's my prevention intervention angle. And so that's what I wanted to do when I came to the University of Missouri. And my very last project on postdoc was kind of just looking at what had been done to make sure that insomnia treatment is even effective in this population. So this is my first, maybe my only ever meta-analysis, where we looked just at the efficacy of insomnia treatment among people with alcohol use disorder. And you can see the behavioral treatments are here in red. So CBTI is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. PMR is progressive muscle relaxation, which is typically a component of CBTI, but these people just tested it by themselves. And then all the medications that had been tested. And alcohol use disorder. Also, here are the sample sizes of these studies. So just noting that they're very small. And actually the CBTI, 20 of these people were in a waitlist control. So it was CBTI versus like a relaxation. I don't know what the control group was. Some placebo, behavioral placebo thing, and then a waitlist control. So we do see this was significant. The behavioral treatments tend to have stronger effects than medication treatments. So this is just another reason for going with the behavioral insomnia treatment in the insomnia treatment trials. One of the things you don't see here in this meta-analysis or in the previous literature is insomnia treatment having an effect on alcohol use. But there were a couple of reasons I think this might be the case. One, for most of these, all of these people had alcohol use disorder. The prevailing model for treatment of alcohol use disorder is abstinence. So as you might imagine, eligibility for most of these trials included more than 30 days of abstinence at baseline, and it's hard to decrease drinking from 0. So I think it's a lack of power issue in these trials of, approximately 40 to sometimes 100 people. Most of them didn't, I'm so sorry. Most of them didn't report alcohol-related problems as an outcome. And as I kind of alluded to, in my postdoctoral studies, we didn't always find consistent associations with drinking quantity, but we did tend to find really consistent associations with alcohol-related problems. And so I was curious to see if they would have had effects there. And then they varied a lot in terms of whether or not people were in treatment. And having now run a couple of these trials, I now know that's because it's really hard to get them when they're in treatment, and recruitment is just chronically an issue. But this is another consideration for all of these trials. So when I got here, I did what you do when you really want to study something and submitted 3 different grants to do kind of the same thing in slightly different populations. So my first was a internal grant, one of the research board grants, looking at the impact of CBTI among heavy drinking young adults, and this is the prevalence of insomnia in each of these populations that you see here. I had already submitted actually an R21 looking at CBTI among veterans seeking treatment for alcohol use disorder within the VA. And then my K23, my Career Development Award, was designed to look at CBTI effects among heavy drinking veterans in the community. And for all of these studies, they were randomly assigned to cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia or sleep hygiene. And then we followed up. Our longest follow-up was 3 months. And all of them were about the same. I was lucky enough that all of these came through. So I'm going to tell you about the first 2 today. All of these, again, were the same. AIM 1 was really looking at effects on insomnia to make sure we got effects on insomnia. AIM 2 is to look at whether or not it had effects on alcohol use and alcohol-related problems. And then AIM 3 was to look at CBTI effects on all of these potential mechanisms that might explain why sleep would be linked to alcohol use. And so consistent, if any of you all are familiar with the addictions neuroclinical assessment, going back to the addiction cycle, the 3 different constructs they talk about in that model are incentive salience, which is not exactly the same as craving, but craving is the easiest indicator to measure. Negative emotionality in our studies, again, was things like anxiety, depression, and difficulties with emotion regulation. And then executive function, which I will not be presenting to you today, in part because most of these are actually behavioral tasks. And behavioral tasks became very difficult to do during COVID. So I don't have very much data for them. The other one we do have is delayed discounting, was originally proposed as an indicator of executive function. I don't remember if I put that in here, but I will tell you if it was significant or not when I get there. And then the other one that was relevant for veterans in treatment for alcohol use disorder that we proposed that maybe having your insomnia treated would make you better able to attend to and retain the information that you learn during alcohol treatment. And so maybe there would be increases in treatment related learning that could account for better alcohol treatment outcomes in this population. The problem here is this is very difficult to measure. There were no validated measures. And so I was kind of making this up on the fly, and I haven't gone through it yet. So I'm not going to tell you if it worked because I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to give you the outcomes for the first 2 trials, the young adult trial, where we had a sample of 56, and the veterans and treatment for alcohol use disorder. And both of these are published now. So you could go look them up if you wanted. The average age, Part of why I like presenting these together is that the samples were so different. So the young adult trial obviously was young adults. The age range was 18 to 30. The average age in our veteran trial was 46, and our oldest participant was 71. The young adults were primarily female. Not surprisingly, veterans and alcohol use treatment tended to be male. Potentially the only thing they had in common was they were mostly non-Hispanic white. Both of these took place actually in person for the most part. For the AUD treatment trial, we ended up having to switch to remote halfway through to account for COVID, but a lot of them were actually still in treatment. This was at the Truman VA, and so we were still in person for most of it. Young adult trial, they were definitely more educated. 95 had at least some college, and that was only 79%. In the veteran trial, as you might expect, lower rates of actual severe alcohol use disorder in the young adult trial compared to the people in alcohol treatment. And then comorbid diagnosis was very common in both samples, but more common in the veteran trial. We basically didn't exclude, I don't remember now what we did for the young adult trial. We didn't exclude for anxiety and depression and things like that. But in the veteran trial, I think reviewers wanted us to exclude for PTSD and things like that, but it is just impossible to get a sample of people who drink and have insomnia and don't have PTSD. So we ended up, the only thing that got you excluded from the veteran trial, which also happened during COVID, so, all hands on deck. The only thing that got you excluded was if you reported seizure disorder or if you had a history of manic episodes, because those are contraindications for sleep restriction, which is one of the core components of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So our primary outcome in both the trials was the insomnia severity index. It's a self-report measure of insomnia symptoms that they use all over. Here in the young adult trial, our timing points were baseline, post, and 1 month follow-up. And then insomnia severity index, let's see, I think it goes 0 to 21. So you can see they started about the same. We had significant effects at post, and then sleep, they didn't decrease as much as 1 month. So this wasn't significant anymore, although it's still kind of a moderate effect size. And in the veteran trial, we had significant effects at both time points. So here, the time points were baseline, post, and 6-week follow-up. And the other thing to note here, in the veteran trial, they were all in treatment at the Truman VA. So we typically caught them right as they were entering treatment, and it was a 6-week program, and it was a 5-week insomnia treatment. So for most of them, the time span from baseline to post catches their time in alcohol treatment, and then the post to 6-week follow-up is the 6 weeks that they are out, their transition out of alcohol treatment, which is, you'll see why that's relevant here in a second. So for drinking patterns, the young adult trial, we use the daily drinking questionnaire. In the veteran trial, we use the timeline follow back. And here you can see in the young adult trial, basically no effect on drinking whatsoever. If anything, sleep hygiene did better. And in the veteran trial, almost the exact same thing. These are parallel lines. So, and this is where this makes sense, right? So from baseline to post, this is when their alcohol treatment, they've all decreased to almost no drinking whatsoever. We had some outpatient people who are probably accounting for why this is not completely zero. And then from post to 6-week follow-up, you see increases in drinking quantity in both samples. Alcohol-related problems, we use these two questionnaires. Both have been validated lots of times in each of these relevant samples. And so here you'll see in the young adult trial, we had a marginal effect. This is not a significant between group difference, although maybe it's worth noting. But our CBTI people decreased and then kind of stayed the same, and our sleep hygiene people. So this was a marginal moderate effect that wasn't actually significant. And then our veteran trial, what you see, we have our, both of them decreased, not surprisingly, from baseline to post when they're in treatment. But then the sleep hygiene group increased in alcohol-related problems from post to 6 weeks, and our CBTI people stayed about the same. So this was really exciting. This is the first trial to find a direct effect on alcohol-related problems, which is why it got into a good journal. Thank you. Thank you, veterans at the Truman VA. And then so for both of these, we also tested a mediation model looking to see if change in insomnia accounted for change in alcohol-related problems at follow-up, and that was the case in both of the trials. Change in insomnia at post-treatment explained change in alcohol-related problems at follow-up. We did run this for drinking quantity just to be safe. It was not significant. So then for alcohol craving, I actually don't know. For alcohol craving, which we assessed using the Penn alcohol craving questionnaire, we did actually have a significant effect on alcohol craving at post for the young adult trial, which I was not actually expecting, mostly because I wasn't really expecting young adults to report a lot of craving for alcohol use, but we got an effect here. You can see though, their alcohol craving is not very high. It starts at 6. But we technically got a small effect here. We did not get the same effect in the veteran trial, which is where I was expecting it. Although one of my colleagues, Brett Froliger, who actually you all might probably know, he was talking to me about why this might be the case, that basically the environmental structure and the context of alcohol treatment takes craving away for most people because you don't have an option. And so maybe that's part of why we didn't get an effect here. I have no idea, but we didn't get an effect here. Monetary choice questionnaire is what we use to measure delay discounting, which theoretically is supposed to be an indicator of executive function, but does not seem to be the case. But either way, delay discounting is basically just a preference for smaller immediate rewards over larger delayed rewards. And so you'll see in the young adult trial, we had a significant difference here, but in the wrong direction. Oh, no, this was in the right direction. Sorry, I'm getting my trials confused. This one is correct because you want decreases in delay discounting. Sorry, now I'm getting myself confused. So discounting of large rewards is basically large rewards are discounted more than smaller rewards. So you do not want them to delay discount. So this is right. Okay, sorry, I had to count myself. So you do not want delay discounting. Higher delay discounting is negative. And then difficulties with emotion regulation was one of the negative emotionality domains that we proposed to examine, and then affect, but we didn't actually get to examine it in both of the trials. In the young adult trial, there were significant baseline differences. So technically we did get an effect here, but you can't interpret it because they were different at baseline. And then in negative affect, we didn't see an effect here. But the problem here is that when I measured alcohol, this was my first time using the PANIS, and I didn't change this. So they were responding to their affect right in this moment, which is clearly, if you're doing assessments at baseline 6 weeks and post in 6 weeks, that doesn't really make sense. And so this was a measurement error on my part. So conclusions from these trials, CBTI does seem to reduce insomnia among active heavy drinkers, as well as those with alcohol use disorder. And in both trials, it seems it potentially has an effect on alcohol-related problems. And so then in terms of future directions, I wanted to look to see, is sleep truly a mechanism of change in alcohol-related harm, meaning we would have the power to have the direct effects, and also look at sex differences to see if this is true for men and women. There's some evidence to suggest that associations between sleep and alcohol use are different for men and women. And so this is an important area of future research. I also want to see what dimension of sleep is actually linked to change in alcohol-related harm. So sleep is usually conceptualized using the 2-process model. So it's partially homeostatic sleep drive, how sleepy you are at bedtime, and then also there's a circadian rhythm component. And we don't know right now which one of those is changing or seems to account for change, improvements in insomnia. So I want to look at that. I would love to include some more objective assessments. We did have actigraphy in the young adult trial. I don't know that I actually highlighted that as well as I should have. We found significant decreases in actigraphy assessed sleep efficiency in the young adult trial. We did not propose actigraphy for the veteran trial. And then the alcohol treatment trial. And then for the veteran trial I have ongoing, we proposed actigraphy, but then COVID happened and we weren't getting them back. And so we just stopped. And so now that's mostly self-report as well. But I would love to look and see if there are changes actually in things like slow wave sleep and REM sleep and things like that as well. And then the other thing that's interesting here that I kind of glazed over would be how it's possible for CBTI to have an effect on alcohol problems in the absence of an effect on drinking. So we did not see reductions in drinking, but we still reduced alcohol-related problems. And so why or how that could be the case is kind of interesting. Is it just that you're for example, you're handling your emotions better. And so even when you are drinking, you're having fewer problems, or is it an executive functioning thing where you're more on board and able to, manage your cognition better? I don't know. There's also some data that maybe there's a pharmacokinetic effect where when you are not sleeping well, you metabolize alcohol differently. I have no idea. These are all new areas, but things that we can think about in the future. So I just want to give a quick shout out to everyone on the research team. So you all know that science is a team sport. These are all the collaborators who actually helped me get the grant. These are all the clinicians and providers at the VA who helped me actually implement and recruit all the participants for the R21. And these are the very many undergraduate and graduate trainees and project coordinators who helped with the day-to-day and were the interventionists on this trial. And then these are the people in my current lab, and I am happy to answer any questions that you have.
You can turn off on your videos and clap for her. Okay, I'll start with the first question. So I was just thinking, in adults who have never taken alcohol or don't have any history of substance abuse, what is the number one predictor of insomnia in this population?
Wait, can you repeat the question? The number one predictor of insomnia among
who don't drink, in adults that don't have any history of drinking, and they don't also have any history of substance abuse. What are the greatest predictors for insomnia in these people?
Well,
and what do you think
maybe
about
stress, I guess. I don't actually know if I could give you a number one. But the model that you think about is there's a 3P model of insomnia, that some people are just biologically predisposed to insomnia symptoms. They have a more active like alerting system or something like that. You all would know more about that than I do. And then for those who are predisposed to insomnia, usually there's some acute perpetuating event. So for veterans, for example, deployment or returning home from deployment or a traumatic event can then trigger insomnia symptoms. Mm-hmm. And for some people, that stress-induced sleep problems, they'll go away when the stressor resolves. But some people then go on to develop habits or thoughts or behaviors that they think are helping with sleep, but that actually don't help with sleep. So alcohol use is an example of one of these, where they use alcohol because they think it helps them fall asleep. And I shouldn't say thinks, because it helps them fall asleep when they drink enough at first. And so then they continue using alcohol, but then eventually it ends up being detrimental to your sleep. So it's one of those things where using it to help with sleep, but it's like a negative feedback loop. The other thing people do is spend a lot of extra time in bed. So I know that I'm not sleeping enough. I need to sleep enough. And maybe if I just lie here long enough, sleep will come to me, kind of thing. And so they develop all these behaviors. So, but if I had to pick one predictor of stress in people who don't drink, it would be stress, probably.
Okay. I was also wondering, did you by any chance collect any dietary intake information? Like, how does nutrition or food intake moderate the relationship between alcohol use and sleep disorders?
Oh, I didn't. I thought about it though, actually, as my filler to make assessments the same length. Mostly, I don't know how to assess that well. So if anyone wants to collaborate, I'm happy to. I've talked to Dr. Canley about this too. I'm not sure how to assess a lot of these things in a way that's valid, and this isn't my area, so I did not.
Dusty, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to read it? Go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, I can go ahead and ask it. I mean, you might have answers for me. I was mostly curious about like preclinical data and brain mechanisms. Do we know how sleep might affect dopamine?
Yeah, so you would be really, if this is an interest of yours, you'd be really interested in George Kube's research articles on this. He's written a lot about it, but there's a lot of data indicating that sleep affects reward circuitry in the brain. And that's all his articles are about. I actually was going to include one of his images, but you have to pay like $400 to include it. I was like, sorry, I don't need it that bad. Sorry, guys, go read the article. So there's a lot of data there. And I was going to show a picture so that I wouldn't have to remember all the circuitry, because I'm not familiar with it. But
did you say COUP? C-O-U-P?
It's KOOB.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, and actually, so George Koob is the director of NIAAA, the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, and then Nora Volkow is the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and she also has a lot of articles on this, so which is probably why it's getting funded. Wow. And actually, this is a good time for me. I just got awarded an R1 to do this, like yesterday. Thanks. But so if any of you are interested in this topic or adding, like, now would be the time to reach out, because I'm designing a study right now, and I'm actually hoping to talk to Dr. Manrique about adding, like, maybe doing a supplement to look at some cardiovascular stuff. So if this is of interest, let me know. This is a good time.
Thank you. One other question that I put in the chat is, does insomnia, and I'm assuming this answer is yes, but I just want to confirm, does insomnia associate with decreased parasympathetic tone?
So in the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system is highly implicated in insomnia disorder. I do not know of research articles to point you to for that specifically. I'm guessing yes, but I don't.
Okay. I was mostly thinking because you pointed out how difficult it is to find veterans with insomnia and alcohol and AUD that don't have PTSD, and decreased parasympathetic tone associates with PTSD. So I'm wondering which comes first. So
yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. And again, that kind of goes back to the stressor thing, where a lot of the veterans with PTSD also have insomnia. And one of the concerns is that, well, if they have PTSD, is it really PTSD or is it insomnia? And basically the conversation we would have with the veterans in our trials was, you know, you're having nightmares throughout the night. You have all these other things going on. This treatment is not going to improve your nightmares. It's not designed for nightmares, but you have all these other things that it is designed to do. So if you want to do the treatment trial, I can almost promise you your sleep is not going to be 100% better at the end of the trial, but it should be a little bit better. Do you want to do it? And that's, we still got effects on insomnia. Thank goodness. So.
Any other questions, graduate students? We still have time.
If what is in the R01, I mean, what kinds of things are you adding more to these great preliminary studies, or are you, increasing sample size, or are you, what's the primary focus of those?
So the focus is actually looking at it as a true mechanism where we're powered to look at it as a mechanism and to get effects on both sleep and drinking quantity, but it's not with veterans because too specific and hard to recruit. So it's just adults who drink heavily and have insomnia. And our goals, most of it is self-report and actigraphy are the two measures that we're going to include for sure. I haven't decided if the ActiveWatchers just got discontinued. So I think we might be switching to Fitbit. The problem with Fitbit, it doesn't measure core body temperature, and core body temperature is important to know if you're having circadian effects. So this isn't actually part of the grant, but one of the things I'd like to do is parse apart if we're getting circadian changes or if it's more of a homeostatic sleep drive change. And so for those, I need more physiological assessments. So if you all are good at this, or someone knows some affordable device that measures core body temperature in light.
Dr. Canale over there.
So I
guess also, I mean, people who don't drink still have worse sleep with aging. And so I'm wondering, are you after enough people that all of these additional effects?
Yeah. So this is the thing that always comes up in reviews, and we did we capped it our age, I think, at 50 for this study. So technically, I guess it's 18 to 50-year-olds. But sleep doesn't actually change that much with age. It's like it changes like 2% per decade or something.
Okay.
So it does change with age, but not as dramatically as everyone assumes. And actually, older adults tend to report better sleep quality than young adults. So there's some things.
I'm thinking about the perimenopausal transition for younger women. Yeah, as they go through that, I'm sure sleep is disrupted by temperature and all kinds of other things.
Yeah. So we kept it at 50, and we are going to screen for menopause and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Matthew.
So someone asked if there are objective measures of alcohol consumption or if it's all self-reported. The problem is, so they have watches now where you can get the alcohol watches. What are they? I'm blanking on the name right now. There are watches, the monitor. The problem is they're not actually great at giving you moment by moment data. So I'm working on I'm a co-I on a grant right now where they're looking at whatever these watches are called. But they're looking at the similar alcohol watches, and the data is not as clean as you would really like it to be. And so we didn't propose that in part because it's burdensome. They already have to wear the active watch, and it's just not that great of a measure quite yet.
Do people who have trouble sleeping every night? How big of a window do you have to capture?
So for insomnia, it's 3 nights a week. It takes you more than 30 minutes to fall asleep, or you're awake for more than 30 minutes in the middle of the night, 3 nights a week for at least 3 months are the quantitative criteria for insomnia disorder.
And I'm wondering if the students on the call are thinking about the fact that exercise makes you tired. I mean, what are your questions for her regarding those kinds of timings? Anybody have any?
Dusty has another question.
Yeah.
Oh.
It'll be basic.
Oh, okay. So Dusty asking, how did the childhood sleep studies control for other predictors of alcohol and substance use disorder, like trauma or ACE scores, stuff like that? For some of them, they were covariates. There was one. What did they not control for? None of the studies controlled for something that I thought would have been important. I don't think it wasn't maybe socioeconomic stuff. No, that seems too silly. There was something. They were missing something, one of them. But most of them controlled the association, remained even when they were controlling for other things. Like actually Dr. Wong's studies, she was specifically recruiting children from families where like a parent had an alcohol use or substance use disorder and thing like that. So for the most part, it's remained after controlling for things like that and like externalizing and internalizing disorders. They were missing something like stress, or I don't think it was SES, but something like that just wasn't measured. So they didn't control for it.
Any more questions? Okay, so if no more questions, if you can show your faces and unmute and all be there. So many congratulations. New associate professor.
No, it was a really good day yesterday.
Congratulations. Thank you for your talk.
Congrats on the R01.
Yeah.
Hey, definitely reach out, Jill.
Yep.
Let me know.
Well done.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Great
Bye,
talk.
everybody.
Thank you.